Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another plunge into the depths of history? Today, we're tackling a subject that never fails to fascinate, the enigma that is Lee Harvey Oswald.
Ah, Lee Harvey Oswald. A figure shrouded in mystery, forever linked to one of the most pivotal moments in American history, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
We're not here to offer definitive answers, but to explore some lesser-known details about Oswald's life and the events leading up to that fateful day in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963.
Exactly. And we'll be using a variety of sources, like the Dealey Plaza Echo research journal, to guide our exploration. Think of it as a treasure map leading us to some hidden gems of information.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Where do we even begin with a figure as complex as Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, one place to start is with Oswald's time in New Orleans, just a few months before the assassination. Specifically, a radio interview from August 1963 that offers a glimpse into his public persona at the time.
A radio interview? I'm intrigued. What does it reveal?
Well, it highlights Oswald's vocal support for Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. At this point, he was even the secretary of the New Orleans chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
So he was actively involved in pro-Castro activism. That's definitely significant, especially considering the political climate of the time.
Absolutely. And in this interview, he passionately defends Castro and Cuban self-determination, framing it within the context of anti-interventionism. He criticizes U.S. involvement in Latin American affairs and portrays Castro as a leader fighting for freedom from foreign influence.
Okay, so we have Oswald, a former Marine, publicly defending Castro and railing against American interventionism. Is there anything that jumps out at you as particularly noteworthy in his arguments?
Well, there's one rather glaring omission in his narrative. He conveniently avoids mentioning his own defection to the Soviet Union in 1959 or his Russian wife, Marina.
Wait, he leaves out that rather significant detail. It seems like a crucial part of his story, especially considering his pro-Castro stance.
It's a curious omission, isn't it? It's almost as if he's carefully crafting a specific image for himself, one that aligns with his pro-Castro activism, but conveniently sidesteps his own complicated past.
So was he a true believer in the cause, or was this carefully constructed persona a means to some other end?
It's a question that lingers as we delve deeper into Oswald's life. Was he a genuine ideologue or a master manipulator playing a role? We'll keep circling back to this question of his motivations as we uncover more pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, so we started in New Orleans in 1963, but let's rewind the clock even further, back to 1959, a few weeks before Oswald defects to the Soviet Union. This is where we encounter a detail that always raises eyebrows, his trip to Helsinki, Finland.
Helsinki, why is that significant?
Well, it's not so much the destination itself, but the circumstances surrounding his trip. Picture this. Oswald, seemingly preparing to renounce his American citizenship and embrace communism, arrives in Helsinki.
Okay, I'm following. What's so unusual about that? Lots of people travel to Finland.
It's not the travel itself, but where he chooses to stay. Instead of opting for a modest hostel or budget accommodation, which you might expect from someone supposedly about to defect, he checks into the Hotel Torny.
The Hotel Torny, I'm not familiar with that one.
It was, and still is, the most expensive and prestigious hotel in all of Helsinki. Not exactly the image of a penniless defector, wouldn't you say?
That is a bit peculiar. So we have a young man seemingly on the verge of defecting to the Soviet Union, staying at a luxury hotel. What's the explanation for that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the plot thickens when you consider the history of the Hotel Torny. During World War II, it was suspected of being a hotbed of espionage, with various foreign intelligence agencies, particularly the British, keeping a close eye on it.
A hotel with a history of spies. Okay, now this is getting interesting. So, was this just a strange coincidence, or could there be more to Oswald's choice of lodging?
Well, the story gets even more intriguing when you factor in what happened after the war. From 1944 to 1947, the Hotel Torny was actually occupied by Soviet authorities.
Hold on, are you saying that Oswald stayed at a hotel that had once been a suspected spy hub and was later occupied by the Soviets?
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's hard to dismiss that as mere coincidence. You have to wonder if someone was bankrolling his trip or if he was meeting with someone there.
It does raise some serious questions about Oswald's connections and who might have been supporting him. Was he truly acting alone, or was he perhaps unknowingly part of something larger?
And as if that wasn't intriguing enough, after spending a night at the Hotel Torny, he moved to another upscale establishment, the Hotel Klauskirche.
2 luxury hotels in a row. For a supposed penniless defector. It definitely seems like there's more to this story than meets the eye.
Unfortunately, hotel records from 1959 have been lost to time, so we may never know for sure who Oswald met with or how he paid for his stays.
That's a shame. Those records could have provided invaluable insights. But even without concrete evidence, the choice of hotels itself is a fascinating detail that adds another layer of intrigue to the Oswald puzzle.
It's a piece of the puzzle that begs further examination. A reminder that even seemingly small details can hold immense significance when piecing together a complex event like this.
Now, before we dive into Oswald's defection and his time in the Soviet Union, let's take a slight detour and talk about a figure who emerged during the Warren Commission hearings, a woman referred to only as Jada.
Jada. Who is she and how does she fit into the story?
Initially, there was a lot of mystery surrounding her. She was mentioned in the hearings as a stripper, but her true identity and the circumstances of her death were unknown. It even fueled some rather outlandish conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories seem to be drawn to cases like this, like moths to a flame. So did anyone ever figure out who Jada was?
They did. A researcher named Mark K. Colgan did some impressive digging and uncovered her real name, Janet Adams Conforto. It turns out she was quite well known in Dallas, even starring in a burlesque film called Naughty Dallas.
Naughty Dallas. Sounds like a glimpse into a different side of 1960s Dallas. So how does Jada's story connect to Oswald?
Well, while her death, which happened in 1980, initially seemed suspicious, it was ultimately attributed to a motorcycle accident.
So not a conspiracy then, just a tragic accident.
It seems that way. So while Jada was connected to the world of Dallas nightclubs, a world that both Jack Ruby and Oswald were known to frequent, her story doesn't appear to offer any bombshell revelations about the assassination itself.
Okay, so maybe not a direct link to the assassination, but still a fascinating glimpse into the underbelly of Dallas at the time. It shows just how complex and interconnected this whole world was.
It really does. And it makes you wonder what other hidden connections are out there, just waiting to be discovered.
Speaking of connections, let's talk about another American who defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, Robert Edward Webster. His story adds another layer of complexity to the Oswald puzzle.
Robert Edward Webster. I'm not familiar with that name. What makes his story so relevant to our discussion of Oswald?
Well, for starters, both men had military backgrounds. Webster was an ex-sailor, and Oswald, as we know, was an ex-Marine. And here's where it gets interesting. They both defected to the Soviet Union within weeks of each other in 1959.
Within weeks of each other. Wow, that's quite a coincidence. Two American military men, both disillusioned with the West, defecting to the Soviet Union around the same time.
It does make you wonder if there is something in the air at that time, some shared disillusionment, or perhaps even some external influence that led them both down a similar path.
And it doesn't stop there. Both men also returned to the United States around the same time in 1962. Their lives seem to eerily mirror each other.
It's almost as if they were on parallel tracks, both drawn to the Soviet Union and then both disillusioned by it. It makes you wonder if their paths might have crossed at some point during their time there.
And you know what? They might have. Remember Marina Oswald's address book? The one with that mysterious friend in Leningrad?
Yes, I remember that detail. What about it?
Well, that friend lived in the same Leningrad apartment building as Robert Webster.
No way. That's too much of a coincidence to ignore. What are the odds of their wives knowing each other in Leningrad?
It does seem incredibly improbable, especially when you consider the vastness of the Soviet Union and the difficulties of travel at that time. It makes you question if this was a chance encounter or part of something more orchestrated.
So did researchers dig into this connection between Marina Oswald's friend and Robert Webster? Did they find anything significant?
They did uncover some interesting details. For example, upon returning to the U.S., both Webster and Oswald expressed disillusionment with Soviet life. But what's peculiar is that Webster faced significantly more scrutiny upon his return compared to Oswald.
That is strange. You'd think Oswald, having defected and offered to share radar secrets about the U-2 spy plane with the Soviets, would have been subjected to a more intense investigation.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But while Webster was extensively interrogated by the CIA, the Air Force, and even questioned by the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, Oswald received a relatively low-key debriefing.
That's definitely peculiar. So we have these two men with remarkably similar backgrounds, both defecting and returning around the same time, their wives connected in Leningrad, and then a stark difference in how they're treated upon their return. It just adds another layer of mystery to this whole situation.
And here's another intriguing tidbit. Oswald and Webster bear a physical resemblance to each other.
They look alike.
Enough so that some researchers have speculated about the possibility of composite photographs being used.
Composite photographs. I'm not familiar with that term. What does it mean in this context?
It refers to the idea that some of the photos identified as Oswald might actually be composites, combining elements of his face with, potentially, parts of Robert Webster's face.
Whoa! That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
Yeah.
You saying that some of the images we've come to associate with Oswald might not be entirely genuine?
It's a theory that's been explored by several researchers, and it raises some fascinating questions about how visual evidence can be manipulated and how easily our perception of reality can be influenced.
So we have these two men with their strikingly similar backgrounds, their wives connected, their shared defection and return, their resemblance, and now the possibility of doctored photos. It's all starting to feel like a puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit. Where does this all lead us?
That's the question that continues to haunt researchers and fuel speculation. It leads us down the path of questioning whether Oswald was truly acting alone or whether he was, perhaps unwittingly, part of a larger intelligence operation. It's like we're peering through a fogged-up window, trying to make out the shapes on the other side. The pieces are there, but the picture isn't quite clear.
And just when we think we've glimpsed something solid, another layer of mist obscures our view. Like this whole idea of composite photographs, it's both intriguing and unnerving.
Right. If we entertain that possibility, that some of the images we have of Oswald might be altered, it really makes you question everything you thought you knew.
So if these photos were composites, why go through all that trouble? What could be the motive behind creating these altered images?
Well, there are a few possibilities. One theory is that it was a way to create a false identity for Oswald, making him appear to be someone he wasn't.
Like a patsy. Someone who could be easily framed for the assassination.
Precisely. Or maybe even multiple individuals were using his identity for some nefarious purpose. It's a chilling thought, I know, but in a case like this, you have to consider all angles.
It's like trying to navigate a maze where the walls keep shifting, and every path seems to lead to a dead end.
That's a great analogy, and it really highlights the challenge we face when trying to untangle the truth about the events surrounding the assassination. We're dealing with a mix of hard facts, speculation, and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Speaking of unanswered questions, let's circle back to that article in Dealey Plaza Echo about Oswald's stay in Helsinki. The author mentioned trying to track down those hotel records from 1959. Any luck with that?
Sadly, no. As far as I know, those records are still missing. The hotel changed ownership in the early 70s, and it seems those records vanished into thin air.
Oh, what a shame. It's like a missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle.
It is, and it highlights how crucial primary sources are for historical research. Imagine what those records could have revealed, who Oswald met with, how he paid for those stays. So many potential clues lost to time.
It's a reminder that even the most meticulous research can hit a wall. But even without those records, the very fact that Oswald chose those specific hotels with their connections to espionage and Soviet authorities, it's still a significant piece of the puzzle.
I completely agree. It makes you wonder, what was he really up to in Helsinki? Was it just a quick stop on his way to Moscow, or was there something more going on behind the scenes?
Now let's go back to that radio interview with Oswald in New Orleans, the one where he conveniently skips over his defection to the Soviet Union. That interview is a fascinating primary source in itself. It's like listening to a carefully rehearsed performance.
Yes, I noticed that too. It feels like Oswald was using the interview as a platform to promote a very specific image of himself, a champion of Cuban liberation and an advocate for anti-interventionism.
Right. It's the discrepancy between his public persona and his hidden past that makes you question his sincerity. Was he genuinely passionate about the cause, or was he simply playing a role, maybe even being manipulated by someone else?
Exactly. And that brings us back to the fundamental question about his motivations. Was Oswald a true believer, or was there something more calculated at play?
It's amazing how even decades later, Lee Harvey Oswald's story continues to fascinate and intrigue us. He's such a complex and contradictory figure, a former Marine who embraces communism, an American who defects to the Soviet Union and then returns, a husband and father who is ultimately accused of assassinating the President of the United States. It's a story that just defies simple explanations.
He truly does. It's like trying to grasp smoke. Every time you think you have a hold of it, it slips through your fingers. And that's what makes him such a compelling subject for historical inquiry. His life was anything but ordinary, and even beyond its connection to the assassination, it's a story that has its own power and resonance. It speaks to our enduring fascination with mystery and the human search for truth.
Speaking of searching for truth, there was a little detail in that article about Jada that caught my eye. It mentioned a dry cleaner near Dealey Plaza that specialized in removing bloodstains. Kind of a random detail, but it really stuck with me.
I know what you mean. It's these little everyday details, these glimpses into ordinary life, that somehow become even more poignant when juxtaposed with a monumental event like the Kennedy assassination.
It's a reminder that life went on, even in the face of such a tragedy. People still needed their clothes cleaned, routines continued, even as the world grappled with this unimaginable event. It makes you think about all the individual stories, the personal experiences that get overshadowed by the larger historical narrative.
Exactly. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, our ability to adapt and persevere, even in the face of unimaginable loss and uncertainty.
And it highlights how history is embedded in the everyday, woven into the fabric of our lives and the places we inhabit. It's not just dates and names in textbooks. It's alive in the streets we walk down, the buildings we see, the stories we tell.
Now, let's shift gears back to those theories surrounding Oswald. Remember the idea of composite photographs, the possibility that some of the images we have of him might be manipulated? Well, a researcher named Jack White, he really delved into this theory, using something called a split-face composite technique to analyze different photos.
Split-face composite technique. That sounds pretty high-tech. What exactly is that?
It's actually a pretty simple concept. Basically, you take two different photos and split them right down the middle, then combine the left half of one face with the right half of the other. White used this technique to compare images of Oswald with photos of other individuals, looking for any inconsistencies or signs of manipulation.
Interesting. So, what did White's analysis reveal? Did he find anything to support the composite photo theory?
His findings were actually quite intriguing. He concluded that some of those photos identified as Oswald did show inconsistencies that could suggest manipulation, like certain facial features seemed misaligned or didn't quite match up perfectly across different images.
So, if these photos were indeed composites, what would be the purpose of creating them in the first place? What was the end game here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One possibility is that it was a way to create a false trail, to implicate Oswald in activities that he wasn't actually involved in.
They're saying someone might have been deliberately framing him, making it look like he was in places he wasn't, or meeting with people he never actually met.
It's a chilling thought, but it's a theory that many researchers have explored.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the question of whether Oswald acted alone. If someone was manipulating his image, creating a false trail, it suggests a much bigger conspiracy at play, doesn't it?
Exactly. It raises the question of who might have been behind such an elaborate scheme and what their motives could have been.
It's like we keep peeling back the layers of an onion, and with each layer, the mystery deepens. We started by asking, who killed Kennedy? And now we're grappling with questions about Oswald's true identity, his motivations, the possibility of fabricated evidence. It's enough to make your head spin.
That's the nature of this case, isn't it? It's a labyrinth of intrigue. And with every twist and turn, we seem to uncover new questions and even deeper mysteries. But even as we grapple with all these complexities, it's important to remember that the pursuit of truth is often a journey without a clear destination.
That's a good point. We may never have all the answers, but the process of searching for those answers, of digging through the evidence, exploring different perspectives, that's what deepens our understanding. It's about more than just finding a definitive conclusion. It's about engaging with the mystery, embracing the ambiguity.
Precisely. And in a case like this, where so much remains unknown, sometimes the questions we're left with can be just as valuable as the answers we find.
Now, I want to touch on something we briefly mentioned earlier, the various theories about who might have been behind the assassination. We know about the official narrative presented by the Warren Commission, but there's a whole world of alternative theories out there.
Oh, absolutely. The Kennedy assassination is like a breeding ground for conspiracy theories, with countless books, articles, documentaries exploring different possibilities. And some of these theories are incredibly elaborate.
I think it's understandable why people are so drawn to these theories. The assassination of a young, charismatic president like Kennedy was such a traumatic event for the nation. The idea that there might be more to the story, that forces beyond our comprehension might have been at play, it can be both intriguing and unsettling.
It's human nature to seek explanations, especially for events that seem so senseless and tragic. And in the absence of definitive answers, people often create their own narratives to fill the void.
So, without going too far down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, are there any alternative theories that stand out to you as particularly compelling or well-researched?
Well, one theory that's gained quite a bit of traction is the idea that Oswald was part of a larger plot orchestrated by elements within the U.S. government itself. This theory often points to Kennedy's perceived challenges to the established power structure, from his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis to his stance on Vietnam.
So the theory suggests that powerful figures within the government saw Kennedy as a threat and decided to eliminate him.
Yes, that's the basic premise. And this theory often focuses on organizations like the CIA, the FBI, or even the military, suggesting that rogue elements within these agencies might have been involved.
It's certainly a chilling thought, the idea that the very institutions that are supposed to protect us could be involved in such a heinous act.
It is. But it's important to remember that these are just theories, even the ones that are well-researched. They lack concrete evidence to prove their claims definitively.
Right. We have to be careful not to confuse speculation with fact. But at the same time, it's important to keep an open mind and consider all possibilities.
Absolutely. The search for truth requires us to question everything, to challenge our assumptions, and to be willing to consider perspectives that might differ from our own.
Now let's talk about a specific theory that's detailed in Dealey Plaza Echo. A researcher named John Galter, who's dedicated years to investigating the assassination, presents a rather elaborate scenario involving the FBI, the CIA, and a network of right-wing extremists.
Ah, yes, Galter's theory. It's certainly a complex one, but it's definitely worth exploring. It's like a tapestry woven from numerous threads connecting individuals and events that, on the surface, seem completely unrelated.
Can you give us a brief rundown of Galter's theory? What are the key elements and connections he highlights?
Okay, so the basic premise is that Galter believes Oswald was actually an FBI informant operating undercover in New Orleans, his mission, to infiltrate a gun-running operation linked to this shadowy organization called Permindex, headed by a man named Clay Laverne Shaw.
Permindex. Wasn't that the organization investigated by Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney who became famous for his pursuit of a conspiracy behind the assassination?
Yes, that's the one. Garrison believed Permindex played a key role in the assassination plot. And there were all sorts of rumors swirling around about the organization, linking them to intelligence agencies, organized crime. It was a real mystery.
So in Galter's theory, Oswald is this unwitting pawn caught between the FBI and this enigmatic Permindex organization. Where does the assassination plot fit into all of this?
Well, according to Galter, a group of high-ranking officials in Washington, deeply unhappy with Kennedy's policies and the direction he was taking the country, decided to have him eliminated.
Wait, are we talking about a coup d'etat? A plot orchestrated from within the government itself? That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and according to Galter, these officials enlisted the help of a notorious right-wing extremist named Joseph Miltier, a man with known connections to various white supremacist organizations.
Miltier. Wasn't he the one who made those chilling comments about a plan to assassinate Kennedy? Comments that were actually recorded by the FBI just weeks before the assassination.
You got it. Those recordings, which only surfaced after the assassination, added fuel to the fire of all those conspiracy theories. They seem to suggest that someone out there had prior knowledge of the plot.
So, Galter connects all these different threads. Oswald's alleged role as an FBI informant, the shadowy Permindex organization, disgruntled government officials, and the cryptic warnings of Joseph Miltier to paint this picture of a vast and intricate conspiracy.
Exactly. He argues that Oswald was ultimately a patsy, a scapegoat, manipulated by forces beyond his control and set up to take the fall for Kennedy's murder.
It's a compelling narrative, isn't it? It taps into our deepest fears about the abuse of power, about hidden forces working behind the scenes to shape our world.
It does. And that's the allure of conspiracy theories. They offer a sense of order and explanation in the face of chaos and tragedy. They allow us to believe that even in the darkest of times, there's a logic, a reason behind the seemingly random events that shape our lives.
But as we've discussed, it's crucial to approach these theories with a critical eye, to separate speculation from fact, and to avoid drawing firm conclusions based on circumstantial evidence.
Absolutely. Galter's theory is meticulously researched and presents a very compelling narrative. But in the end, it's just one interpretation of events. And like all the theories surrounding the Kennedy assassination, it remains unproven.
Right. And it's crucial to consider the evidence, to weigh the plausibility of different scenarios, and to be open to the possibility that we may never have all the answers. But even in the absence of definitive conclusions, the exploration of these theories can be incredibly valuable. It challenges us to think critically, to question what we think we know, and to grapple with the complexities of history.
You know, we've spent a lot of time focusing on the external events and connections in Oswald's life, but there's another aspect of this case that I think is worth considering, his psychology.
His psychology, what do you mean?
Well, beyond all the external factors, there's the inner world of Lee Harvey Oswald. His motivations, his beliefs, his state of mind. To truly understand his actions, we need to delve into the psyche of the man himself.
That's a fascinating point. We've been digging deep into the historical context, the political landscape, the networks of connections. What about those internal factors that might have contributed to his actions?
Exactly. Was he a lone wolf, driven by a desperate need for notoriety? Was he a pawn manipulated by forces beyond his control? Or was he a complex and troubled individual whose actions were the result of a perfect storm of personal and political circumstances?
These are questions that may never be definitively answered, but they are questions that deserve our attention as we try to make sense of this enduring mystery.
And it's a reminder that history isn't just a collection of facts and dates. It's about people, their choices, their motivations, and the often unseen forces that shape their lives.
It feels like we've gathered all these puzzle pieces, but we're still missing the box top,
Yeah.
We can kind of see the image forming, but we're not sure exactly what we're looking at.
I think that's a really great way to put it. Maybe like a complex work of art. The true meaning of Lee Harvey Oswald's life and actions will always remain open to interpretation. We might never have a definitive answer, but the process of searching, exploring all these different threads, that's what really deepens our understanding.
After all this digging, do you think we're any closer to understanding Lee Harvey Oswald, the man behind the myth?
I think we've definitely gained a much deeper appreciation for the complexities of this case. We've moved beyond that simplistic portrayal of Oswald as just an assassin. This was a real person with hopes and dreams, with flaws, a product of his time.
And it's clear that his story, while it's forever linked to the assassination of President Kennedy, it also has its own intrinsic value. It's a story about ambition and disillusionment, about choices and consequences, and ultimately, it's a story about tragedy.
One thing that really stands out to me is just how many times we encounter these moments of almost unbelievable coincidence in Oswald's life. Like his stay at the Hotel Tourney, the connection between Marina's friend and Robert Webster, the timing of their defections, and then the difference in how they were treated when they came back to the U.S. It just makes you wonder if there was something more deliberate happening behind the scenes.
It's like those moments in a movie where you just kind of roll your eyes and think, oh, come on, that's way too convenient to be believable. But then you remember, this isn't a movie, this is real life. And sometimes real life is even stranger than fiction.
Exactly. And that's what keeps this case so fascinating, even after all these years. It challenges our perceptions. It makes us question what we think we know about the past.
Well, before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to make sure our listeners have some resources if they want to keep exploring this case on their own. Because a conversation like this is really just the beginning, right?
Oh, absolutely. For folks who are interested in digging deeper into these alternative theories and uncovering more evidence, I highly recommend checking out the Dealey Plaza UK research group. They publish this fantastic journal called Dealey Plaza Echo that's full of incredible research and analysis.
And if you're really feeling adventurous and want to go even further down the rabbit hole, the JFK Lancer website is an absolute goldmine. They have articles and documents, photos, videos, you name it, they've got it.
And of course, there's always the Sixth Floor Museum in Dallas, located in the former Texas Schoolbook Depository. It's a very powerful experience. Visitors can actually stand in the spot where Oswald allegedly fired those shots. Really puts you right there in that moment.
So for all of our deep divers out there, the journey doesn't end here. The mysteries surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald, they might never be completely solved. But that doesn't mean we should stop searching. The pursuit of these answers, even if they are elusive, it helps us understand history, and in a way, it helps us understand ourselves a little bit better too.
Absolutely. As we continue to grapple with the legacy of this event, I think the most important thing is to keep an open mind, to question everything, to never stop seeking the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to find.
Well said. Until next time, keep diving deep. And remember, sometimes the questions we're left with are just as important, if not more important, the answers we find.